I need you to say it was your approval, Karina. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I stared at Colin across the massive boardroom table. 20 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on me. My heart hammered against my ribs as the silence stretched on. It wasn't me, Colin. You know that, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile never wavered, cold, calculated, like he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. Then I'm afraid you're leaving us no choice. The room felt like it was spinning. After 6 years of dedicated service, after countless late nights and perfect performance reviews, this was how it ended? You're fired, Karina, effective immediately. The gasps around the table sounded distant, like I was underwater. Someone dropped their pen. I heard a woman whisper, "Oh my God," under her breath. But Colin? He just sat there, casually brushing imaginary dust off his expensive suit jacket. Like he'd just ordered coffee instead of destroying my career. I looked around the room at faces I'd worked alongside for years. Some looked shocked, others avoided eye contact entirely, but none of them said a word. My name is Karina Patterson, and I'm 38 years old. 2 hours ago, I was the operations manager at Brookfield Consumer Logistics, a mid-sized shipping company in downtown Chicago. I'd built my reputation on being reliable, thorough, and honest. Now I was jobless, sitting in my car in the parking garage, staring at the concrete wall in front of me. 6 years. That's how long I'd given this company. 6 years of arriving early, staying late, and treating every project like it was my own business. I'd streamlined their vendor approval process, saved them hundreds of thousands in inefficiencies, and never missed a single deadline. But none of that mattered now. Colin Hartwell, the Golden Boy VP who'd been with the company for only 2 years, had just made me his scapegoat. And the worst part? I saw it coming. For the past 2 months, something had felt off. Little things at first. Being excluded from meetings I usually ran, finding my access to certain systems mysteriously revoked, Colin taking over approvals that had always been mine. I should have trusted my instincts, but I'd been too naive, too trusting. It started 8 weeks ago, right after Colin returned from his vacation in the Bahamas. He called me into his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and leather furniture that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Karina, I've been thinking," he said, not bothering to look up from his laptop. "I want to take a more hands-on approach with our major vendor relationships this quarter." I shifted in the uncomfortable chair across from his desk. "Okay, what did you have in mind?" "I'll be handling the big approvals directly. Anything over $50,000 comes through me first." He finally looked up, flashing that practiced smile. "It's just temporary. I want to understand the process better." It seemed reasonable enough. Colin was ambitious, always looking for ways to impress the executive team. If he wanted to micromanage for a few months, that was his choice. "Sure," I said, "whatever you think is best." But as I walked back to my cubicle, something nagged at me. Colin had never shown interest in the day-to-day operations before. He was more of a big-picture guy, focused on strategy and presentations. Why the sudden change? Over the next few weeks, the changes came fast. First, I lost access to the primary vendor database. Then my approval authority was quietly reduced from $200,000 to $50,000. Calendar invites for important meetings stopped appearing in my inbox. When I asked Colin about it, he always had an explanation ready. "Oh, that meeting got moved to executives only," he'd say with a dismissive wave. "Nothing you need to worry about." Or, "The database access thing is just a security update. IT will get you sorted soon." But IT never called. The meetings continued without me. And slowly, methodically, I was being pushed out of my own job. The worst part was how Colin made it seem like I was being forgetful or paranoid. "You must have missed that email, Karina," he'd say with fake concern. "Are you feeling okay? You seem a bit scattered lately." I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every missing invite, every system I could no longer access. Call it paranoia, but something told me I'd need proof of what was happening. I just didn't know how right I was. The bomb dropped on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing routine invoices when I saw it. A bill from Rapid Transit Solutions for $350,000 in expedited freight charges. My blood ran cold. I knew this invoice. I'd flagged it 2 weeks earlier as suspicious and recommended it be denied. The charges were inflated by at least 60%, and we'd never authorized any expedited shipping at that volume. But according to the system, it had been approved. By me. I immediately pulled up the approval history, my hands shaking as I clicked through screens. There it was, in black and white. Approved by E. Patterson, with yesterday's timestamp. Except I'd been in meetings all day yesterday. I hadn't approved anything over $10,000 in weeks. I grabbed my phone and called Colin, my heart racing. Colin, we have a problem. That rapid transit invoice for $350 went through, but I never approved it. There was a pause. What are you talking about, Karina? The invoice I flagged. Someone approved it using my credentials. Are you sure you didn't approve it? You've been pretty overwhelmed lately. The condescending tone in his voice made my stomach churn. I'm sure, Colin. We need to investigate this immediately. Let me look into it and get back to you. But he never called back. The next morning, Colin's assistant sent out a meeting request that made my blood freeze. Emergency vendor review, all executives required. I wasn't invited. 20 minutes before the meeting, Colin appeared at my desk with a thin smile. Karina, I need you to join us in the boardroom. We're discussing that invoice situation. The boardroom was packed. CEO Amanda Sterling sat at the head of the table, flanked by the entire executive team. Finance director, operations chief, legal counsel, everyone who mattered was there. Colin stood at the front like a prosecutor presenting his case. Behind him, a huge screen displayed the rapid transit invoice, with my approval clearly highlighted. This is a significant oversight in our vendor management process, Colin began, his voice steady and professional. A $350,000 payment was approved without proper authorization. Eyes turned to me. I felt my face burning. The approval came from Karina's account, Colin continued. This falls directly under her operational domain. Amanda Sterling's gaze was ice cold. Karina, can you explain how this happened? This was my moment. I could feel Colin watching me, probably expecting me to crumble under pressure. Instead, I looked directly at him. It wasn't me. The silence in the room was deafening. Colin's smile never wavered, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or anger. I'm sorry? Amanda Sterling leaned forward. What do you mean, it wasn't you? I mean, I never approved this invoice, I said, my voice getting stronger. I flagged it as suspicious 2 weeks ago and recommended denial. Someone else used my credentials to push it through. Colin stepped forward smoothly. Karina, I understand you're under pressure, but the system clearly shows your approval. Are you suggesting someone hacked your account? I'm suggesting someone with administrative access pushed this through and made it look like I approved it. The implication hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew Colin had administrative access to all approval systems. His face hardened. That's a very serious accusation, Karina. Do you have any proof? I have documentation showing I flagged this invoice as suspicious. Documentation that you could have created after the fact. Colin interrupted. The simple truth is that this mistake happened on your watch, under your authority. Amanda Sterling's patience was clearly wearing thin. Karina, taking responsibility for mistakes is part of professional growth. Colin is offering you a chance to explain what went wrong in your process. I looked around the room at 20 faces, most of them already convinced of my guilt. Only Miranda from HR looked uncomfortable, like she sensed something was off. I won't take responsibility for something I didn't do, I said quietly. Colin sighed dramatically. Then I'm afraid we have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately. I didn't cry in the parking garage. I didn't call my sister or my best friend. I didn't even feel angry yet. Just numb, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The security guard had walked me to my car with my belongings in a cardboard box. 6 years of my professional life reduced to a few personal items and a dying plant. I sat in my Honda Civic for probably 20 minutes, just staring at the concrete wall. Other employees walked past, some glancing curiously at my car. Word would spread fast. By lunch, everyone would know Karina Patterson had been fired for a massive vendor mistake. Finally, I started the engine and drove home to my small apartment in Lincoln Park. I climbed 3 flights of stairs, unlocked my door, and set the cardboard box on my kitchen table. Then I walked to my home office and opened my filing cabinet. Thank God I'd been paranoid. Thank God I'd documented everything. I pulled out file after file, printed emails, approval histories, system screenshots, meeting notes, everything I'd been collecting for the past 2 months, evidence of Colin's systematic campaign to push me out. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed smoking gun proof, and I knew exactly where to find it. Colin thought he was clever, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He assumed I only had access to current systems, not the archived backups. What he didn't know was that I'd helped design the company's backup protocols 3 years ago. I had read-only access to historical data going back 5 years, access that hadn't been revoked because it was buried in an old IT ticket system. I logged into the archive server and pulled up the approval history for the rapid transit invoice. What I found made my hands shake with excitement. The original approval wasn't mine. It was Colin's, time-stamped 2 days ago at 11:47 p.m. But then, just 6 hours later, the approval record had been modified. Colin's name was scrubbed and replaced with mine. He'd literally rewritten history in the system. But archives don't lie. I had screenshots showing the original approval, the modification timestamp, and even the IP address of the computer that made the change. Colin's laptop. I printed everything, making 3 copies of each document. Then I dug deeper into the archives, looking for patterns. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't Colin's first time playing with the system. Over the past 6 months, he'd approved dozens of questionable invoices, then quietly transferred the approvals to other people's accounts after the fact. I wasn't his first victim. I was just his biggest. I spent the entire weekend organizing my evidence into a clear, damning presentation. 47 pages of documentation showing Colin's pattern of fraud, manipulation, and system abuse. But I didn't call Amanda Sterling. I didn't schedule a meeting with HR. I didn't even hire a lawyer. Instead, I printed a clean copy of my evidence packet, bound it professionally, and addressed it to Amanda Sterling's executive assistant with no return address. Inside, I included a simple cover letter. Miss Sterling, the attached documentation raises serious questions about the vendor approval process and recent personnel decisions. I believe this information warrants immediate investigation. All documents can be independently verified through your IT department's archive systems. No signature. No emotional pleas. Just facts. I mailed it on Monday morning from a post office across town, then went home to wait. If Amanda Sterling was half the leader people said she was, she'd investigate. If not, at least I'd have a clear conscience knowing I'd tried to expose the truth. Either way, Colin had no idea what was coming. According to Miranda from HR, who texted me updates despite probably violating company policy, Colin was riding high after my firing. He's been telling everyone you had an emotional breakdown, she wrote. Said you couldn't handle the pressure of a mistake and tried to blame others instead of taking responsibility. The narrative was brilliant in its simplicity. Karina Patterson, overwhelmed and unprofessional, made a costly error and then pointed fingers when confronted. Colin Hartwell, the responsible leader, had to make the difficult decision to protect the company. Miranda's next text made my stomach turn. He's pushing for a promotion to senior VP. Says he needs more authority to prevent future incidents like yours. So that was his endgame. Frame me for his mistakes, position himself as the solution, and climb another rung up the corporate ladder. He probably thought he was untouchable now. But I knew something Colin didn't. Amanda Sterling hadn't built a $50 million company by taking things at face value. She was methodical, analytical, and absolutely ruthless when she smelled deception. My anonymous packet should have reached her desk by now. All I could do was wait and see if she was as smart as everyone said. 3 weeks after my firing, Miranda sent me a screenshot that made me smile for the first time in weeks. It was a calendar invite from internal audit. Vendor process review meeting, required attendance. The attendee list was telling. Colin, the finance director, 2 IT specialists, and Amanda Sterling herself. They're asking weird questions. Miranda texted later. Someone from audit spent 2 hours with our IT guy yesterday, looking at system logs. Then, Colin looks nervous. He snapped at his assistant this morning over nothing. I pictured Colin in his expensive suits trying to maintain his confident facade while investigators poked holes in his carefully constructed lies. The thought filled me with grim satisfaction. But the best part came the next day. Miranda forwarded me another message. They found deleted files in the system, files that someone tried to scrub from the approval database. IT says whoever did it didn't know about the automatic backup protocols. My heart raced. They were finding exactly what I'd hoped they'd find, evidence of Colin's tampering that he thought he'd covered up. The investigation was just getting started, but already Colin's perfect crime was unraveling. Amanda Sterling was nothing if not thorough. Over the next week, audit investigators interviewed everyone who'd worked on vendor approvals over the past year. Miranda kept me updated. They talked to Jessica from accounting for 3 hours yesterday. Asked specifically about the deleted spreadsheet. You know, the one where your name got removed from the approval chain. I remembered that spreadsheet. It documented the complete vendor approval workflow, including my role as the primary reviewer for large invoices. 2 weeks before my firing, my name had mysteriously disappeared from the document. At the time, Colin claimed it was a clerical error that would be fixed soon. It never was. They're also reviewing all the invoices Colin approved in the past 6 months, Miranda added. Apparently, there's a pattern of approvals being transferred to other people's accounts after the fact. So they'd found his other victims. The maintenance manager who was written up for approving overpriced cleaning supplies. The logistics coordinator who nearly got fired over suspicious fuel charges. Both times, Colin had swooped in as the concerned leader demanding accountability. Now Amanda Sterling was seeing the full scope of his deception. I wondered how Colin was sleeping at nights. Not well, apparently. Miranda's updates painted a picture of a man slowly losing his composure under pressure. He yelled at the receptionist yesterday because his coffee was wrong, she texted. Everyone's talking about it. Colin never loses his cool like that. Then, caught him in the supply closet on his phone, having what sounded like a heated conversation with someone. He didn't know I was there. The pressure was getting to him. For months, Colin had operated with complete confidence, secure in his position and his carefully laid plans. Now investigators were crawling through every decision he'd made, every system he'd accessed. The facade was cracking. Oh, and get this, Miranda added. He's been asking people if they've heard from you, trying to make it sound casual, but everyone can tell he's fishing for information. That made me nervous. What was Colin thinking? Was he worried I might fight back somehow? Or was he planning some new angle to discredit me? I decided to be extra careful about my communications with Miranda. If Colin was getting desperate, there was no telling what he might try. 2 days later, I mailed my second anonymous package to Amanda Sterling. This one contained something even more damning. A recording of the Zoom call where Colin had verbally approved the rapid transit invoice. I'd been invited to that call originally, but Colin had mistakenly removed me from the invite at the last minute. What he didn't know was that the meeting organizer had sent me the recording link afterward, thinking I might want to catch up on what I'd missed. The audio was crystal clear. At the 23-minute mark, Colin's voice came through loud and clear. Yeah, approve the rapid transit charges. We need to expedite this shipment so the premium is justified. No hesitation. No consultation with anyone else. Just Colin unilaterally approving a $350,000 expense that he would later blame on me. I'd saved the recording to my personal drive, along with the timestamp data proving when it was made. The meeting was 2 weeks before my firing, the same day Colin claimed to have first learned about the suspicious invoice. This wasn't just fraud anymore. It was perjury, committed in front of the entire executive team. I wondered how Amanda Sterling would react when she heard Colin's own voice contradicting everything he'd told her. The response was swift and decisive. Emergency email just went out, Miranda texted, barely containing her excitement. Colin's taking a personal leave of absence, effective immediately. I stared at my phone, reading the message 3 times to make sure I wasn't dreaming. The email says he requested the leave for personal reasons, Miranda continued. But nobody believes that. Security escorted him out an hour ago. Personal leave. That was corporate speak for suspend pending investigation. Amanda Sterling was moving Colin off the board while audit finished building their case. You should see the office right now, Miranda added. People are whispering in groups, trying to figure out what happened. Susan from legal looked like she'd seen a ghost. I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with relief. After weeks of watching Colin smugly enjoy his victory over me, justice was finally catching up to him. But this was just the beginning. A leave of absence wasn't a firing. Colin still had a chance to talk his way out of this if the evidence wasn't airtight. I needed to make sure Amanda Sterling had everything she needed to finish the job. The full scope of Colin's corruption came to light over the following weeks. According to Miranda's increasingly excited updates, the audit team had uncovered a systematic pattern of fraud going back almost 2 years. They found vendor kickbacks, she texted. Colin was approving overpriced contracts in exchange for personal payments. There's a paper trail leading to an offshore account. That explained the Bahamas vacation, the expensive suits, the luxury car he claimed was a lease deal. And remember those performance bonuses he got for cost savings? Miranda continued. Turns out he was approving inflated invoices, then negotiating them down to normal prices and claiming credit for the reductions. The genius was diabolic. Colin would approve a $100,000 invoice that should have cost $60,000, then negotiate it down to $70,000 and pocket a bonus for saving the company $30,000. Meanwhile, the company was still overpaying by $10,000, and Colin was collecting rewards for his excellent vendor management. Legal says it could be criminal fraud, Miranda added. They're talking about pressing charges. I thought about Colin sitting in his expensive apartment, probably hiring lawyers, and trying to figure out how his perfect scheme had unraveled so completely. He still had no idea I was behind the investigation. The call came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Colin's leave of absence began. Ms. Patterson? This is Amanda Sterling. I was wondering if you'd be available to meet with me tomorrow. My heart nearly stopped. The CEO of Brookfield Consumer Logistics was calling me personally. Of course, I managed to say. What time works for you? How about 10 a.m. in my office? And Ms. Patterson, I owe you an apology. The meeting was surreal. I sat across from Amanda Sterling in her corner office, the same woman who'd watched silently as Colin destroyed my career 6 weeks earlier. I'm going to be direct, she said. Our investigation has revealed that you were set up by Colin Hartwell. The vendor approval you were blamed for was actually his, and he manipulated our systems to make it appear otherwise. I nodded, trying to look surprised. We've also discovered that someone provided us with crucial evidence that helped expose a much larger pattern of fraud. I have a strong suspicion that someone was you. I met her gaze steadily. I'm not sure what you mean. She smiled. Fair enough. Regardless, I want to offer you a consulting contract to help us rebuild our vendor management systems. Your rate would be $200 an hour, and we estimate the project will take 6 months. $200 an hour. For 6 months. That was almost $250,000. I accept, I said. Walking back into Brookfield's offices felt like stepping into an alternate universe. 6 weeks ago, I'd been escorted out in disgrace, carrying my belongings in a cardboard box. Now I was returning as a highly paid consultant, brought in to fix the very problems that had gotten me fired. The reactions were priceless. Some former colleagues avoided eye contact, probably embarrassed about believing Colin's lies. Others offered awkward smiles and mumbled apologies. Miranda practically tackled me with a hug. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. Colin's story never made sense. But the most satisfying moment came when I walked past Colin's old office. The nameplate was gone, replaced by a simple, vacant sign. His expensive furniture had been removed, leaving just empty walls and carpet indentations where his desk used to be. A complete erasure of his presence. I was given a temporary office on the same floor, with a view of the Chicago skyline and all the system access I needed to do my job properly. It felt like justice. Over the next few weeks, the whispered conversations and sideways glances gradually faded. People began treating me normally again, some even seeking my advice on vendor-related issues. The apologies came slowly but steadily. Tom from accounting approached me by the coffee machine. Karina, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken up in that meeting. Sarah from logistics was more direct. I always thought Colin's story sounded fishy. You were too thorough to make that kind of mistake. Even Miranda confided that she'd wanted to defend me during the termination meeting, but was afraid of losing her own job. I didn't hold grudges. These people weren't evil. They were just scared employees trying to survive in a corporate environment where speaking up could cost you your career. But the apology that meant the most came from Jessica, the accounting manager who'd been Colin's previous scapegoat. He did the same thing to me last year, she said quietly. Made me think I was going crazy, questioning my own memory. I'm sorry I didn't warn you. It's okay, I told her. None of us saw the full picture. That was Colin's real skill, isolating his victims so he couldn't compare notes and see the pattern. The official termination announcement came on a Friday afternoon. Effective immediately, Colin Hartwell is no longer employed by Brookfield Consumer Logistics. No thank you for his service, no mention of his contributions, just a cold, corporate statement that he was gone. Miranda forwarded me the internal email chain that followed. Employees were buzzing with questions. What had Colin done? How long had it been going on? Were criminal charges being filed? Amanda Sterling called an all-hands meeting to address the rumors. Some of you may be wondering about recent personnel changes, she said calmly. I want to assure you that we take financial integrity very seriously. When evidence of misconduct comes to light, we act swiftly and decisively. She didn't mention Colin by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. We're implementing new oversight procedures to prevent similar issues in the future. She continued. These changes will be developed with input from our consulting team. Several heads turned toward me. Word had spread quickly that I was the consultant brought in to fix the vendor management system. The same system Colin had corrupted. The irony was perfect. The woman he'd tried to destroy was now being paid handsomely to clean up his mess. The ripple effects of Colin's downfall spread throughout the company. 2 directors who had backed him during my termination suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. James Morrison, who'd nodded approvingly during Colin's presentation against me, was quietly reassigned to a lesser role. Patricia Webb, who'd questioned my emotional stability in the meeting, received a formal reprimand for her handling of the situation. Amanda Sterling was clearly sending a message. Blind loyalty to corrupt leadership would not be tolerated. The company announced a comprehensive compliance overhaul, built around the documentation and procedures I was developing as a consultant. My name was prominently featured in the internal communications as the lead architect of the new system. 6 months ago, I'd been a mid-level operations manager working in obscurity. Now I was essentially redesigning how a $50 million company managed its vendor relationships. The consulting contract was also opening doors elsewhere. Word spread through industry networks about my role in exposing the fraud at Brookfield. Other companies reached out, wanting to hire me to review their own systems. By the time my Brookfield contract ended, I had enough business lined up to launch my own firm. 6 months later, I was sitting in my own office in a downtown Chicago high-rise, looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Patterson Consulting Services specialized in helping companies and individuals protect themselves from workplace fraud and manipulation. My client list was growing steadily, filled with businesses that wanted someone who understood how corruption worked from the inside. The irony wasn't lost on me. Colin's attempt to destroy my career had actually launched something bigger and more successful than I'd ever imagined. My tagline, printed on business cards and letterhead, was simple but effective. We are the receipts. It perfectly captured what I offered: documentation, evidence, and accountability in a corporate world where truth was often negotiable. The phone rang constantly. Companies wanting fraud investigations, employees who suspected they were being set up, whistleblowers who needed help organizing their evidence. All of them had learned the same lesson I had. In a world of corporate lies and manipulation, documentation was power. And I had become very good at helping people document the truth. I never reached out to Colin after his termination. Never gloated. Never sent angry emails. Never tried to twist the knife. But through Miranda and other former colleagues, I heard fragments of his story. He'd hired an expensive lawyer, but couldn't fight the mountain of evidence against him. The criminal charges never materialized. Corporate fraud cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute. But his career was effectively over. No reputable company would hire him after word spread about the Brookfield scandal. He'd burned too many bridges, betrayed too many people. Last I heard, he was working at a small logistics firm in Milwaukee, making a fraction of his former salary. Sometimes I felt a flicker of pity for him, not because he didn't deserve his fate, he absolutely did, but because he'd thrown away a promising career for relatively small amounts of money. The vendor kickbacks, the inflated bonuses, the offshore accounts, all of it together probably amounted to less than $200,000 over 2 years. He'd destroyed multiple careers and nearly brought down a department for what amounted to pocket change compared to his executive salary. Greed makes people stupid. I was reviewing client files in my office when Miranda texted me a photo that made me smile. It was a picture of Brookfield's new vendor management dashboard, the system I designed during my consulting contract. Clean, transparent, with built-in audit trails that made Colin-style manipulation impossible. "It's beautiful," she wrote, "and it's working perfectly. 0 suspicious approvals in 6 months." That was my real victory. Not Colin's downfall, though that was satisfying, but the knowledge that I'd built something that would protect future employees from what happened to me. The dashboard included automated alerts for unusual spending patterns, mandatory dual approvals for large invoices, and complete audit logs that couldn't be deleted or modified. No future Colin would be able to game the system the way he had. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Chicago skyline as the sun set behind the buildings. My phone showed 17 missed calls from potential clients, 3 contract offers, and a speaking invitation from a women in business conference. Not bad for someone who'd been fired for refusing to take the fall for someone else's mistakes. Colin had tried to erase me from the story, to make me disappear so he could take credit for my work and blame me for his crimes. Instead, he'd given me something better than revenge. He'd given me purpose,